Thank you, everyone. My name's Dr. Christian Buckland. I'm a psychotherapist from the UK, and I've been working with the vaccine injured for a long time, and I'm really privileged and honoured to be here talking to you all about a couple of different topics that are really, really important to my heart. But before I start, I want to put a caveat in, and that is at any time, if you sense that I'm a little bit angry, I'm not. Please forgive me. I'm actually just really heartbroken and disturbed about how we've all been so badly damaged over the past couple of years. It's been a really, really difficult couple of years. So I'm really pleased to be talking about two different topics that are really close to my heart: censorship and behavioural science, and how that's impacted my friends who have been injured by the COVID vaccine. So I know everyone knows what censorship is, so I'm not going to go over it all, but I did just want to highlight a couple of really important points, because I do think they help understand what's going on. I want to acknowledge that censorship is not an easy topic. It is complicated. Deciding what is or what isn't allowed to be said is not an easy thing. And to highlight that, I've got a little graph here, and it's from a poll where people were asked, how should social media companies handle each of the following type of content? And as you can see, right at the top, it's a clear consensus. We do not allow that topic. It should not be allowed. But when you go down the list, you see it's not so clear-cut. If you censor some of those topics, you're going to upset a lot of people. And if you don't censor those topics, you're going to upset a lot of people. So it's not a straightforward conversation. But I do just want to say, in my opinion, there are certain topics that should never, ever be censored. And one of them is people discussing their own lived experiences of trauma. It's really, really wrong. It's also really important to understand that censorship is connected to the overall psychology of authority. Censorship happens when our cultural values and our beliefs are threatened in times of crisis. Or a crisis is used to increase censorship. And the problem is, once that crisis goes down, you don't see the censorship going down. It stays where it is. And that really causes a huge divide in the population. Something else I want to stress, censorship doesn't mean that the information is wrong or someone is lying, because censorship changes over time. And one example of that is just last month we saw YouTube's COVID-19 misinformation policy change. And now you are allowed to say vaccines do not reduce the risk of contracting COVID-19. Whereas last year, or just three months ago, you'd get your YouTube channel taken down and you'd get banned if you said that. And what that helps us to understand is that censorship is a behavioural science tool. Because if you suppress information, you control response. And if you control people's responses, you control their behaviour and you change their behaviour. And that's what behavioural science is all about, getting people to change their behaviours without them knowing. And an example of that has been how we've seen the use of fear being used to change people's behaviour over the last 2.5 years. We saw the artificially inflated risk factors of COVID and the censorship of protective factors such as natural immunity or the importance of a healthy immune system. They were both censored. And what that did was change the population's behaviour towards lots of different topics, such as mask wearing, lockdown, social distancing, and whether it was right or wrong for them to take a COVID vaccine. Because what I believe's happened is that censorship and behavioural science has been used on a public who didn't consent and didn't know it was being used on them. That way? Ooh! I wish I knew that. And what that has done has meant that it's impacted on people's ability to conduct a risk assessment for themselves to say whether or not they should be taking a vaccine. So I think it's been really important to say that censorship and behavioural science has meant that people could not give informed consent whether it was right or wrong for them to take a vaccine. So, moving on to how censorship's impacted those who have been injured by the vaccine, I've spent a lot of time over the last year talking to lots of people who have been injured, and one of the clear messages that was given to me was that people's lived experiences are being denied. People talk to me about going to medical appointments, and the appointment's going really well. They're talking about their symptoms, and all of a sudden they say, I think it might be connected to the vaccine I took only a couple of weeks ago. And they tell me this glazed look comes over many doctors' eyes, and all of a sudden the appointment comes to an abrupt end. We've seen many people's symptoms being blamed on mental health conditions, and that to me is really, really worrying, because just because we can't identify what's going on a physical level does not mean it is psychological. Sometimes it is, and I work with that a lot in my day job, but that does not mean everything is mental health related. We know that the legacy media are refusing to report on it, and I'm sure they're being told they're not to report on it either. So even people who are injured are not getting their message out into the mainstream media. And we know that if people are posting their stories online saying, this happened to me, they're getting censored, they're getting silenced, they're getting taken down, and many people are getting banned off the internet, or off certain social media platforms anyway. And that to me is so dehumanizing, because you've got lots of people saying, this is me, this is my story, this is what happened to me, and this is how I feel. And then all of a sudden, they're taken off, they're censored. It is so, so wrong, and it's so dehumanizing. And because those lived experiences are being denied, what we see is most people are finding their only form of connection with others is through the online support groups that are being set up. And they're popping up all over the world. And it's offering them a connection with other people who understand what's going on for them, and they don't feel they're being fobbed off. The problem is, many of these groups are constantly under threat of being taken down. And we just saw yesterday, the BBC informed Facebook that there were groups using a carrot emoji to avoid censorship, and so Facebook wants to take action. So these groups that are set up to try and help people are always being under threat of being removed. And something I'm a little bit known to go on and on about is that if you censor anyone who has suffered any form of medical trauma, you're going to greatly elevate the chance of that trauma turning into post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is a significantly debilitating and severe mental health condition that greatly elevates people's risk factors of suicide. So censoring the vaccine is really, really dangerous. And something else that I want to highlight is that the censorship that has been used has meant that many medical professionals are simply unaware of vaccine injury symptoms, so are not able to ask those probing questions to get an accurate diagnosis about what's going on for people. And we all know if someone gets a wrong diagnosis, we miss an opportunity for early intervention. And early intervention is so important to a safe recovery. And that means we're going to suffer from avoidable deaths because people have been misdiagnosed. And I just want to concentrate on that last point, because I'm going to give it a bit of a case study to highlight that. So right here we've got a 49-year-old healthy man, self-employed, so probably doesn't want to be out of work. Exercise 5 days a week, so he's physically fit. No previous medical conditions, so he's going to be pretty good. He had an injection in March of 2021, and within 3 weeks he had a blood clot. Referred to hospital and had his treatment, and when he's in hospital, the doctor writes on his discharge letters that it doesn't need reporting to the yellow card reporting system, as it's over 3 weeks since he's had his injection. Sorry, it's over 4 weeks since he's had his injection, which means we've already seen a missed opportunity to report that these injections were causing blood clots. His symptoms got worse over the next couple of months. He went to his GP with stroke-like symptoms, had problems talking, constant ringing in his ears, joint and muscle pain. He lost 5 stone in weight, and as an eating disorder clinician, I know that if someone loses a lot of weight, that's a red flag, there's something wrong. He had tachycardia and high blood pressure, and he got a diagnosis of anxiety. And he struggled for the rest of the year, and he told me he just thought he was going mad. It's obviously in my head, I've just got to pull myself together. He went back to the GP in December, same symptoms, but he got prescribed antidepressants because now he's pretty down because he's really, really injured. In June of this year, he had chest pain and a pulsing neck and was told to go to A&E, who diagnosed AF and recommended to see his GP, who increased his antidepressant. And it was only in July, which was only a couple of days after last seeing his GP, people in his support group that I've just been talking about that keep getting shut down said to him they were so concerned over his pulsing neck and his chest pain that they recommended he sees a private cardiologist as soon as possible. So he did, and he got a diagnosis of right-sided heart failure. So what I'm trying to highlight here isn't that those doctors are deliberately doing something wrong. The censorship means they're unable to do their job properly. They're missing out on important probing questions and considering whether the possibility of people's symptoms could be related to a vaccine. And when I was writing this up, I wanted to make sure I got it right, and I had a chat with him because I wanted to get the information correct. And he said to me that when he was discharged from hospital, he wrote his story up because he wanted to help people who might be suffering with the wrong diagnosis and make sure they got the right help. And he posted it online along with a letter from his, one of the doctors confirming it was related to the vaccine, and it was taken down. And because I'm a very boring psychotherapist, I asked him, how does that make you feel? And he started talking, and I said, Paul, do you mind if I just record that? Because it'll be really powerful to share, because it's very well me saying to you, this is what's going on for people. It's so important to hear it from them. So I've just got a short clip, if that's okay. It's just 2 minutes long. Oh, have we got any volume?
Be so careful what you put on. I got restricted and it was very upsetting. I'm just trying to help people. I'm putting on there what I think, not just my opinion, doctor's opinion of how to help some of these adverse reactions I had, which I thought might be helpful for somebody out there, or at least my story would be helpful for somebody out there knowing they're not going to be alone. But I felt that I'm just so glad I haven't been. Because you get taken off, you lose your support group, you lose all that help around you. Because a few people are stuck in their own home, they can't leave their own home at the moment because they're so ill. So sometimes I can't leave the house. If I got aches and pains, I can't go out. So some people are stuck in a house alone on their own. If they get taken off from that support group, they're in that four walls on their own. They haven't got the usual people they talk to and ask for help, advice. It's heartbreaking. And God forbid, last year I think, when I was talking to people, if I kind of lost that little group, a little hope of somebody else who's going through this, and the advice and support they gave me, if I'd lost that, whether it's for a couple of days, because when you're in that little bubble and you can't do anything, you've got no help, you're so ill, you can't literally leave the house, you can't be bothered to ring people, talk to people, you just want to talk to that group who knows exactly what you're going through. If you lose that, somebody could take their own life, you know, and it's wrong. If they want to censor something, at least contact that person, message that person and say why they put it on there. On certain things, especially if they're saying they're seriously ill. You know, on my group, I put everything what I've been through the last 17 months. And I think if somebody read that and banned me, that is so wrong. And that could push somebody over the edge. So wrong.
It really is so wrong, because these people are talking about their experiences. And, you know, I find sometimes talking to people who have been injured, I find it very hard. And I listen to a lot of different stories and difficult stories all the time. But I find it very distressing listening to people's stories of people who have been harmed, because they're finding it very hard to get the right help. So in summary, all I'm trying to say is censoring the vaccine injured causes unnecessary and additional physical suffering. We're missing out on important diagnosis, early intervention is being missed, and we're increasing the risk of death. And also, we're causing additional unnecessary psychological suffering, and people's mental health is declining due to the fact that their lived experiences are being denied, and that's going to increase the risk of suicide. So finally, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who shared their story with me to help me be able to talk about what's going on for them. And I also want to say a massive thank you to all the support groups out there throughout the world. They really are so many people's lifelines. And thank you very much for listening to me today.
Thanks so much, Dr. Buckland. I really appreciate you sharing this. There's so much power in a story. And for all of you who have stories, families, friends, or even when you are communicating with people in social media and you're part of these support groups, share those stories, because that's one of the doors that we open in communication. Step into their shoes like you stepped into this man's shoes. You can't tell me you didn't feel chills down your body and tears coming to your eyes watching that. Share those stories and open those doors of communication. And remember, everybody feels righteous in what they know or what they think they know. But bring down your guard, put your ego aside, and step into their shoes. And start your storytelling right there. Thank you. And we have a very well-known British activist and broadcaster with us today, and I'm so proud to have you here on the stage to talk with us and talk with everybody here. We have Majid Nawaz, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to begin by apologizing because I was calling you Heather, so I do apologize in public for that. I have formed because yesterday I was calling Christian Richard, and I apologize to you as well. But it's in reference to Christian's question to me earlier that I would like to begin my speech, because he asked me a question when we were speaking over lunch. How does somebody like you end up discussing COVID mandates in a conference full of scientists and medical professionals? And the implication in his question, quite a legitimate implication, may I add, is I've never studied science beyond my GCSEs, which we do in the UK at the age of 16, which is true. I don't have any science qualifications. I have no scientific, psychological, biological, or any other form of ology to my name. So what brings me to this conversation, in answer to the question that Christian posed to me earlier, is why I'd like to speak to you. And the reason is I believe that we are all involved, whether we like it or not, and I'm sorry to put it this way. I will try and give you some hope, but at the moment it's important for you to hear. I believe we are all involved involuntarily in a war against our very souls. And this war is being conducted globally. And those on the other side of this war have far more power in the material sense, and that's what they think power is, even though it's not. And they are using that power to attempt to destroy everything that it means to be human. Now, this war has been named by those people engaging in this war. So if you go back to post-World War II, when I think the world realized that dropping bombs and nuclear bombs on each other may not necessarily be the best way forward, what we began witnessing instead was a series of wars that were called wars, but were conducted by our own governments against what they presented to us were ills in our own society. And if you think back to the war on drugs that Nancy Reagan announced on behalf of her husband, the President Reagan, the war on drugs was initially a war that was ostensibly to stamp out crime in our societies. And so we were all encouraged by government policy to rally around them in this war on drugs, and certain measures needed to be taken, including the dehumanization of a certain demographic that ended up disproportionately in our prison systems. And we can look to the United States of America to see the results of that disastrous war on drugs, but it also impacted the South Americas, which was in fact the battleground for this war on drugs. But the aim that was being told to us, that this is a war on drugs to stamp out crime, was not the real aim of the war on drugs. Instead, the real aim of the war on drugs was to increase state power, was to increase authoritarianism, was to increase the ability of the state to interfere even in foreign countries in the name of a domestic war. But it began, as all things that begin as psychological abuse began, it began incrementally. And the incremental beginning was a war on crime. But notice what happened next. And this is what, in answer to Christian's question to me, what brings me here, it's what involved me against my will. Because after the war on drugs came the war on terror. And like the war on drugs, the war on terror was used not to stamp out terror. Because as you'll notice, just like the war on drugs, the people that conducted this war, the people in fact that began this war, were the ones that started it. And then they wanted us on board to help them finish something they started. What they were telling us they wanted us to finish was terrorism, while they invaded many countries around the world. And I noticed a drone that was flying over here earlier, probably to film everybody, which is a good thing. But it's important to understand that those drones, how I read them, is they drop bombs on people. And that's what they were doing in Afghanistan, that's what they were doing in Iraq. We were told it was to stop terrorism. In hindsight, we now realize it was based on lies, such as the lie that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Such as the lie that bin Laden was in Afghanistan when he was caught in Pakistan. And Pakistan was among the closest allies, my country of origin, among the closest allies to the United States of America in that war on terror. So it went from a war on crime and the war on drugs to a war, what we were told, was to protect our way of life. So first, it's to stop crime, protect our societies, keep them safe. Then, the war on terror is to keep our way of life safe. So you've gone incrementally one step further. Now it's about protecting our way of life in the war on terror. Then comes the war on COVID. Now the war on COVID is a step even further than the war on terror, because it's no longer about protecting our way of life, it's about protecting our very life itself. Our physical lives, our health. So you can see how the temperature is ratcheted up in the war on COVID. Now all of us are involved because we're seeking to stay alive. Not just to protect our way of life, because of course those nasty terrorists wanted to destroy freedom and democracy. Not just to protect our way of life, but to protect our very life itself. So it's more visceral, which allows government once again to incrementally increase the temperature, further the authoritarian measures needed to keep you alive. That's the reason being given to you. Of course, you saw the emergency legislation that was brought in Canada, for example, that allowed Justin Trudeau to freeze bank accounts. Of course, there's a famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, kickboxing world champion called Andrew Tate, who's just had his individual personal bank account frozen for giving a series of podcasts.